Yo, what's up, guys? The Insane Game Freak here. I know I need to make a video on Fire Emblem Warriors. I know we need to talk about Mario Odyssey or Odyssey, whatever you want to call it, platformer heaven, whatever. The point is that there are other videos that need to be made, but I wanted to make it a discussion first about something that's been wrecking my brain because the Xbox One X comes out, I believe, in a little bit over a week. And there's been a lot of talk and discussion about it, but I want to use that as a jumping off point to get into the discussion I'm thinking of, and that's the third party and the power scaling. Right now, I would say third party companies hold the majority of the power when it comes to the majority of these consoles. Actually, I would say they hold the power in every console, PC included, because even though the PC has exclusive games, it's not like there's a lot of Valve specific games. A lot of those games are only made on PC because they're just PC's the easiest to develop for, not necessarily because the PC has the exclusives. I guess the way I need to phrase it is, it's not like the Steam platform is there to create games. They're just housing the games with maybe like a few exceptions. The majority of the games are only made on PC because it's just the easiest and convenient. With the consoles, although they've become easier and more convenient as time has gone on, it's still the same lopsided situation where every console is dictated more by a third party. It's the argument we kept using for Nintendo about, when Nintendo fans during the Wii U era were talking about how you could we don't need third party. Indies could be our third party, which is something I was saying also. And it became this, but the point is that third party is needed for your company to survive. And my question is that a good thing or not? Because I'm not 100% sure either way. People like to say that we need a balance, right? That would be the default response. Well, of course, you don't want to have just third party or just exclusives. You need a balance between both. But the reality is that none of the consoles right now have a balance between both. I would say Nintendo is in the far direction of personal exclusives high, third party pretty fucking low. And then I would say Xbox is on the other side of the spectrum with high as fuck third party and like pretty mediocre to low first party. And I would say Sony's probably the closest to being balanced, but even then I wouldn't argue much because I'm not talking about exclusives. I'm talking about first-party titles made by Sony Studios or studios owned by Sony versus third-party games that even though they might be a third-party exclusive, they're not made by Sony. Sony doesn't own the rights to that IP. That's what I mean. And Sony, like if I put it this way, if Microsoft is like 10% first-party, I would say Sony's maybe like 30%. Yeah, about 30% first party. And some of you would say, that's bullshit. You know that's a fucking lie. And I'm like, no, it's not. Because Sony has gotten less and less invested in their first party games. I think if we talk about their first party titles, and granted, they're still making new IPs. So it's not like 30%. 30% may sound bad in the percentile scaling. But 30% of a million is still 300,000. That's what I mean. Like, just take that with a grain of salt. The point I'm making is none of these consoles are inherently balanced. I wouldn't say Sony is 50-50 right now. It's still a downswing with third parties still holding the majority of the power. And my argument is that really the right thing to do? Is that the right situation to be in where third parties are the reason, or like 70% of the reason why your console's selling well? And I agree that they should be there and they need to be there, but having them have that kind of power to me goes, well, that just means what it'll devolve into. Because some of you would say, oh, well, look at how well Sony's selling with third party. Are you telling me they need less third party? More games is always better. I'm just saying, should we be asking them to create more and more IPs, I guess, and good ones? Because the reality is the reason why Nintendo has as many IPs as they do and they have so much focus on all those IPs is because they had no other fucking choice. It was either do that or have a gap out waiting for either your next Pokemon, Mario, or Zelda game. Pokemon, for the long up until the Switch, it's been handheld only, so you can never even count it towards the GameCube or the Wii or the Nintendo 64, even though all those consoles had Pokemon titles on it. You couldn't even they never put a mainline Pokemon game on any of those systems. And so that's why we're starting to get that's why we're starting to get more and more IPs, especially when you realize how bad things get because the problem with third party, looking at Nintendo situation specifically, is you see what happens when they choose to leave a company. You're just stuck. You're fucking stuck. But looking at Microsoft, you can also see the problem with them being there and holding the whole thing up on their own. Microsoft got super lax, and we only got like 2 or 3 or 4 maybe different IPs, which right now I believe is Gears, Halo, Forza, I guess Crackdown, and that's about it. Everything else being either a timed exclusive or a third-party exclusive, which doesn't mean much. I guess, and if you want to count some of the smaller things like Killer Instinct, but it's the same problem. And the thing is that the advantage of having your own IP is that, for one, you're the one making all the money. 2, it's going to get a hell of a lot of development time because it's starting from scratch internally. And you're adding to genres that completely are taken up by third party. For example, look at the fighting genre. How many actual console makers have their own fighting games? You could probably say Killer Instinct, which doesn't say much because Killer Instinct has literally only had its one game in the longest fucking time. Whereas almost every other fighting game is a third-party game except for maybe like Smash Brothers. Smash Brothers is like the only internally owned IP fighting game by a console manufacturer. Sony had PlayStation All-Stars, and even though people mocked that game for being a Smash Brothers ripoff, which I do myself, it still was their game, and it was still you could have done something with that, is the point I'm making. Instead of just leaving it out there into the pasture to let it die, which is what they did. I got it, it was the laughing stock, but you can make a game better. Especially when you're internally developing it. Is that a problem that the entirety of our... If third parties wanted to just put all their fighting games on Sony platforms, that would mean the other 2 console manufacturers get automatically screwed because they only want to put their fighting games on Sony platforms? Like, see how that's a little disturbing, how third parties can almost completely take a fucking genre away from other gamers, and the other console manufacturers automatically lose because they can't do anything. I mean, and granted, Nintendo's been making steps, and which is why I would argue if we had to space it out in terms of who's doing the best in terms of the third-party, first-party split, I would probably still say Sony, Nintendo, Microsoft, because even though Nintendo, for the longest time, and still doesn't really have great third-party, making your own IPs to fill in those genre gaps is at least doing something versus Microsoft's method, which is just to let third parties do everything and them just sit back and coast, which means they don't make any real money. Almost every game they put out, they're never making 100% of the profit, which is insane when you're a console manufacturer. You went into the game industry and you barely make games. It's a little fucking counterproductive. Now, the thing with Sony is that Sony seems to understand the general idea of how to do this. That's why we're still getting games like Horizon Zero Dawn. I'm not sure if Until Dawn is technically a Sony IP or not. God of War and recreating that and doing stuff with Uncharted. And I think Days Gone is another Sony IP and whatnot. It's not like they've lost the drive to make IPs. The problem I have with Sony's way of handling it so far is that they don't seem to ever bridge out. I mean, you got Ratchet and Clank and you got Crash, and those are like your only 2 platformers. It's another one of those situations where if all the platforming games, which a lot of them have already done this, just wanted to shift and only be on Nintendo platforms, Sony has 2 IPs, one of which isn't even theirs, because technically they don't own Crash. I can't even count Crash. They only got 1 platformer IP, even though they have like 3 or 4 other games they could pick from. I think they still own the rights to Jak and Daxter. I believe they own the rights to Sly Cooper, and they just put out a game for Sly Cooper on the PS3. I feel like letting those fall to the wayside is the same thing. It shouldn't be in a situation where if a genre is when the third parties own almost every game in the genre, because you either make new games, for example, at least for fighting games, ARMS, or you own the IP for it, which is what Microsoft is with Killer Instinct, where they didn't technically create Killer Instinct, but they own the IP for Killer Instinct. I don't know if I necessarily like the fact, because to me that's kind of the problem I have with the PlayStation 4 Pro and Xbox One X, is that they're consoles that are literally dictated by third parties. Like when the Xbox One X was revealed, the only Sony exclusive game they were talking about, I mean not Sony, the only Microsoft exclusive game they were talking about that showed like that the true power of the next gen power of Xbox is Forza, and then the other game they showed to show it off is like Assassin's Creed. Wait a minute, when the hell did Ubisoft become a fucking spokesperson for Xbox? Well, it doesn't matter, because you can buy that game on every other fucking platform. See how that's weird? That's fucking weird. You're showing off your new console and you're showing the power of it, and you have to also include third-party games make up the majority of that Xbox One X lineup, in the sense. And granted, I understand you have the upscaling that the 360 and Xbox original games will get. But my point is still that Forza's like your only new generation game, and then everything else is either upscale Xbox or Xbox 360 games, or fucking third-party titles. I don't know. I don't personally know what is the correct answer here, or if things need to keep remaining the same. Because the other problem is when third parties are the only companies making games in certain genres, and they're the ones dictating everything, that means the advancement of that genre is hinged on whether the third party has the want to make that game better. And other than that game having to sell well, they don't really give a damn about that kind of stuff. That's why a lot of genres end up stagnating. A lot of people say that about shooters. A lot of people say that about open world games nowadays. And people say that about platformers because they just fucking disappeared and you only had one company making them. And granted, I fucking love Nintendo, but it's not like I'm totally against more platformers on all consoles. That's why I wasn't super mad at Super Lucky Tale when I saw the Xbox's thing, until I realized that it was another example of Xbox not actually getting an exclusive, but pretending like it did. That's a whole nother fucking rant. I'm just not sure the way things are going now, where third parties are dictating so goddamn much in the industry, is that really a good thing? Because it feels like at this point, it feels like Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft are just holding up signs, and they're just hoping to God that the third party in question just comes in their direction. Whereas Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft could be making their own games and make third party want to do better. You know, to create a more interesting shooter, it's like, But the problem is that also backfires in a lot of cases. I mean, that was the argument with Nintendo's games for the longest, where people were sitting there going, well, I don't want to put out a game the same day Mario comes out. I don't want to put out a game on the same console that Uncharted comes out. Like, when you feel like you're competing with IPs. But to me, although that could deter them, at the same time, it could also inspire more creative thought. It's like, well, fuck it. If we're gonna support this console because we gotta put our games out on something, maybe we should make a better game. I don't know. Like I said, this is just a lot of conjecture and discussion. I'm curious what people think in the comment section below. I'm just not 100% sure I like the idea of how much power third parties have, to the point where they're selling consoles for you because they're the only games coming out on your system. Which is my concern with Xbox. That third parties, to me, is so much of Xbox. It makes me wonder, what's the X in Xbox? Just the Halo? Just the Gears? And some Forza in there? Like, I don't know. It's like the brands are just fucking cups that you're pouring your games into. Whereas, like, when you look at a Nintendo game or a Sony game, you can go, oh, that's that Sony Nintendo flavor. Whereas sometimes when you look at an Xbox game, it's like, nah, it tastes like it usually does. Like, it's kind of like when you choose between Coke or Pepsi, or Coke or like Sprite and Fanta and shit. Like, they all have distinct flavors, and fucking Xbox is like carbonated water. And that's what happens when everyone else is dictating what shit goes into your cup. It may not have been the most articulate video, but I hope it sparked some interesting discussion, and I'm curious what you guys say in the comment section below. So thank you guys for watching. Check me out on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, VidMe. Thank you guys.
for watching.
And I will catch you guys later. Life's a game, play to win. Peace. Oh.